I'm Rob Poignant of the Innsmouth Book Club, and on today's excursion we're right on the Bedfordshire-Cambridgeshire border in the village of Tempsford. So you may remember last time we were in Ravensden just down the road, and as I explained then, the name Ravensden was applied to the place by the group of Vikings, Danes, who travelled there and set up a small camp, and those Danes came from this larger camp at Tempsford, so it seemed only proper to nip down the road and have a look at what there still is here. As I've mentioned on all these excursions around Bedford, this was the front line for many years between the invading Danes and the Anglo-Saxons. So there's lots of little battles have gone on, lots of conflict all up and down this stretch of land. If you're a Bernard Cornwell fan and you enjoy the Last Kingdom books and TV series that we've just been watching actually, you may remember that he set a battle here in 898, and that battle was the Battle of St Neots, which is just over the other side of the road there. I think it was at the bridge over the River Ouse, and Uhtred took on, I think it was Sigurd. Now as far as I know that was a totally fictional battle, but there was a real battle here in Tempsford when the Anglo-Saxons raided and destroyed the large Viking fortification that had been built here. Now the Vikings did have a settlement up at Huntingdon, but in the year 917 they moved down to Tempsford and they met up with a lot of other groups as well. So that was Danes who were in East Anglia, Danes in Mercia. They all congregated on this point and they built a burg here, a fortified camp. They were led by Guthrum, and you can understand why they picked this spot. We're right on the Great North Road, just across the back there, which I guess was a pre-Roman road that leads from London straight up to York or Jorvik. So it's one of the main arteries of communication in the country. And we're also a stone's throw from the River Ouse, which is just over the back here. So again, that's a place that the Danes would have accessed on the east coast and brought their ships all the way up. Now, some say the camp was actually built on this spot, which is now called Gannocks Castle. More of that later. That is a little bit disputed. Some say it would have been like directly on the riverbank just over here, but wherever, we can be sure we're very close to the area. We'll be able to smell the cooking fires from here. So the Danes gathered their forces here. They built the fortification, they prepared, and then they launched an attack on Bedford. Now that attack was fought off, Bedford was successfully defended, and the next year King Edward the Elder and his sister Ethelfled launched a counter-attack on the burg here. The place was stormed, it was destroyed, Guthrum and a number of his jarls were killed. The Dane casualties ran into the hundreds, and this was quite a pivotal battle because it sort of broke the back of the Danish invasion for quite some time. In fact, it wasn't until 1010, almost 100 years later, that the Danes successfully invaded Bedford and burnt it to the ground apparently. Now if we fast forward about 250 years from the Danish invasion of Bedford, we come to the building of Gannocks Castle. This was a Norman Motte and Bailey construction, built around 1250 or so, and it was a timber fortified manor house with a moat. As you can see, the earthworks are still in existence. You can see the moat and the mound here as well. It was a timber manor house with a northern and southern wing. It was extended in the 14th century, but was largely abandoned by the mid-15th century. And for many years the place was overgrown. It was literally just left. It wasn't until about 2007 that the Friends of Gannocks Castle held a major clean-up operation here. They built this causeway for ease of access. That isn't an original feature, that was something that was built about 15-20 years ago, and it is now a scheduled monument, so it's open to the public. You can come here and visit. They've even put some nice picnic tables out. It's a very nice spot. We actually used to do some of our training here. For many years I was running a martial arts class on a Saturday in Tempsford, and when the weather was nice, or sometimes when it wasn't so nice, we used to come outside here to train. And there was something quite stirring about thinking you were training martial arts on the site of an ancient Viking battleground. So from the medieval, we now move forward to the Georgian era, and despite the length and depth of history in the village, this is the only official ghost story I can find. There is one more personal one, but I'll talk about that a little bit later on. These splendid gates that you see here are all that remains of the original Tempsford Hall. That was built around 1780 by Sir Gilles Payne, and as you can probably hear, back in those days the Great North Road was a little bit further back. In fact, the manor house would have stood pretty much on the Great North Road, or at least in grounds directly on the Great North Road. And as happened with many villages on the A1 now, the A1 either goes around them, or in the case of Tempsford, that 4-lane road goes right through the middle of it. So the village is sort of cut in half by the A1, which makes things a little bit noisy, as you can hear. Anyway, back to our ghost story. So as we mentioned, the original manor house was built in 1780, and we go forward about 50 or 60 years to the then tenant, the lady of the house, a lady called Anne Elliot. And she made a statement that was backed by all of her household staff, the butler, the serving maids, the groom, etc, etc, and even a local policeman put his name to this statement as well, that Tempsford Hall was haunted. They all reported hearing knockings and other strange noises around the house, and there was also something that was described as glimpsed apparitions. Now, I've not been able to find any other description other than that, so whether this was the stereotypical monk or a woman in white or something else, I don't know. There was interesting speculation at the time, quite disparaging speculation, I would say, that all this was happening because Anne Elliot was left alone for long periods of time. Her husband was often working away in London and other places apparently, and I guess in the mindset of the day, a woman left on her own was prone to wild imaginings or something like that. But even that sort of nonsense outlook aside, it's interesting that these events were witnessed by several other people as well. So it seems that there may have been something going on. What it was, I guess we'll never know. I've not been able to find out any other information about this. And in November 1898, Tempsford Hall was destroyed in a great fire. At that time, it was owned by the Stewart family. Well, it was actually bought by Colonel William Stewart, who was a descendant of the royal Stewart household. And he'd filled the hall with works of art and treasures and antiques, and unfortunately almost all of those were lost in this fire, and even the members of the household only narrowly escaped. In 1904 a new hall was built by the Stewarts. This was a red brick gabled mansion, equally grand. It had a billiard room, a grand staircase, smoking room, gun room, all the things a gentleman needs. In 1917, German POWs were set to work the land in that area as well, just towards the end of the First World War. That building is now the headquarters of the Kia Group, who are mainly involved in construction, a big construction company. So that building is still existent. And as I say, all we have left of the original building is this rather marvellous gate. And the little strip of land beyond it, between it and the A1, is now very nice gardens. Very noisy gardens, but nonetheless, it's a nice little piece of greenery, a little reminder of, I guess, what the gardens of the original house would have been like. So we briefly mentioned World War I there in relation to Tempsford Hall. We'll also be coming back to that a little bit when we talk about the Stewart Memorial Hall just down the road. But now we're looking at the Second World War, and Tempsford played a pivotal role in our fight against the Nazis, because Tempsford became the location for RAF Tempsford. In 1940, the Air Ministry constructed an airfield nearby. Now, unlike many other airfields in this area, this was not a bomber airfield as such, like we have at Thurley and other places, but this was a place run and used by SOE, the Special Operations Executive. And you may know that body was set up by Churchill, and their brief from him was simply, "Set Europe ablaze." So SOE were running all the commando operations, they were running things at Bletchley Park, which is not too far across over by Milton Keynes, and they were running RAF Tempsford here. So the airfield was set up and it was given the name Gibraltar Farm, and it was actually disguised as a farm. There's a big barn building was put there. In fact, I think the barn is about the only thing that is left of it now, and inside the barn is a museum to RAF Tempsford. I'm not sure, it's on private land, so I'm not sure what the issues are around opening times and visiting, but I'll put a link up to that in the notes below. So Gibraltar Farm, or RAF Tempsford, was the home of Special Duties Moon Squadrons 138 and 161. That was between 1942 and 1945. Now, their job was to ferry secret agents, arms and supplies to the resistance in occupied Europe, and also to extract resistance agents, downed aircrew, VIPs and that sort of thing. So they were running in supplies and agents and also bringing people back out. 138 Squadron flew Whitley, Halifax and Short Stirling bombers. They were mostly involved in dropping supplies by parachute, arms, food, radios, that kind of thing. 161 Squad flew the Lysander, which is an iconic light aircraft, and what they were doing was delivering and picking up agents behind enemy lines. Now, the Lysander was chosen because it was a very small and manoeuvrable plane. You could land it on a football pitch. It had a fixed ladder on the side, at the side of the cockpit, so a passenger could be in or out in seconds. And by all accounts, what would frequently happen is the plane would land, one person would be out, another person would jump straight in, and then the pilot would take off and head back to Tempsford. As you can imagine, these are all highly secret operations, all extremely dangerous. The stakes were very high. Anyone caught would be handed over to the Gestapo, and we can imagine what would happen there and what did happen. So these were missions calling for great skill and bravery. And in fact, in the church just over the road, there's a remembrance list of 623 aircrew who died during their service here. Quite an incredible amount, I'm sure you agree. But during those 3 years, the squadrons here dropped 995 agents by parachute, landed 485 agents, and rescued 575 downed airmen. The names of some of those agents, I'm sure, will be familiar to you. Violet Szabo, Odette Sansom, Noor Inayat Khan. Their stories have been told in film. And in fact, I think there was a quite recent TV series about the works of some of those early SOE agents in occupied Europe. In honour of their work, this memorial was unveiled in 2013 by the Prince of Wales at a ceremony that was attended by many of the SOE and RAF Tempsford veterans. So we've mentioned the Stewart family a couple of times, and this is the Stewart Memorial Hall. This was built in 1924 in quite sad circumstances, because it was built as a war memorial to William Stewart and 14 other Tempsford men who were killed in World War I. William Stewart was a second lieutenant in the Royal West Kent Regiment, and he was killed on the 7th of October 1916 at the Battle of the Somme. And we still have this marvellous portrait hanging up in the meeting room at the halls. Now, I mentioned my martial arts class earlier. We used to use this hall every Saturday as well for many years, and in fact I still use it for occasional workshops now. It's a great venue for all sorts of things. If you've got any local events you want to put on, then I highly recommend the hall here. I spoke earlier about a personal ghost story, and that's what happened here. So as I said, there used to be a group of probably about a dozen or so of us training here most Saturdays, and quite often we'd see what looked like a figure, the shape of a figure, through the frosted glass on these doors here. Now, we were the only people in the building at the time. If anyone had come in, we would have seen them. There is another entrance through the doors here, but that was always locked. And this little corridor, it just leads to the Tempsford Museum, which incidentally is a great local resource for history. There's RAF Tempsford history here, and of course the history of the village. I believe it's open on the first Sunday of every month. Well worth a visit if you're interested in local history. So that was what we used to see. very distinct outline of a person standing here. Nothing else ever happened. There was no sense of spookiness or anything. I've often been in this hall on my own at different times of day or night, locking up or unlocking. Never felt the slightest bit of unease in the building. Perhaps it's some trick of the light or shadow, or perhaps it's something else. Who knows? I'll be interested to hear if anyone else has ever experienced that, actually. If anyone local has seen that same thing, then do let me know. So thanks for joining me on today's excursion. I hope you found that interesting. I think once again it amazes me how even in these quite small villages there's so much history, from the Dark Ages right through to the Second World War. Not a lot in terms of paranormal activity or what you might call hauntings or ghosts in this place, but if you have heard of any other stories around here, or you have heard of any information on Tempsford Hall or similar, then please do let me know. Likewise, if there's anywhere you'd like me to come and visit on one of my excursions, then also let me know that as well. As always, if you enjoy weird fiction, be that in book, film, computer games, graphic novels, do give a listen to our podcast, the Innsmouth Book Club, where every fortnight we chat over some of our favourite stories and films and talk to authors, artists, writers and other creatives. Now, I'm going to finish up today by going back to the memorial, because there's a poem there that I just wanted to read. Before I do that, I'll just give you a little bit of background about it to set it in some sort of context. So the poem is called Life That I Have, and it was written by Leo Marks. He was a cryptographer who worked for SOE, a code breaker and a code maker. Now sometimes as part of their codes they would use a poem as a key. They did find though the trouble with that was if it was a well-known poem then the key was quite easy to crack. So they began to use poems that they'd written themselves. This particular poem was written in Christmas 1943 by Leo Marks on hearing that his girlfriend had just been killed in a plane crash in Canada. In March 1944, Marks issued this poem to Violet Szabo, the famous SOE agent. So it has an added or a double poignancy because, of course, Violet Szabo was later captured, tortured and killed by the Gestapo. And it is this poem that is now engraved on one face of the memorial here in Tempsford. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. The life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. The love that I have of the life that I have is yours and yours and yours. A sleep I shall have, a rest I shall have, yet death will be but a pause. For the peace of my years in the long green grass will be yours and yours and yours.